Screen sharing. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the July 2025 meeting of the Media Education Lab, Media Ed Club. Today is July the 7th. My name is Wes Fryer, and I am thrilled to have an opportunity to meet with you all virtually and be able to connect. I'm going to see if I can knight Scott and make him a co-host. I think I can do that. So Scott, if you don't mind, um, if we got new folks that are coming in, if you just want to go ahead and let them in, that would be awesome. So if our topic today is privacy, power, and platforms, and this is a really important topic that honestly I struggle to I think help my students care about as much as I think they and all of us should care about. And so I look forward to your thoughts and insights. If some of you have already dropped into the chat, and if you want to share who you are and where you're coming from, what you do, and a little initial question is what are your digital privacy concerns? Do you have digital privacy concerns? As we have in the past, we are going to have some announcements, and we'll share a little bit of a reflection and overview as we begin, and we'll do a little bit of discussion together, but then we'll go to breakout rooms, which is not recorded, and then we'll invite folks to share all together. And of course, it's a sort of interesting, right? Doing a recorded webinar about privacy platforms and power. Um, I became aware a couple of years ago doing this almost weekly podcast and web show with my friend Jason Neiffer up in Montana that like every word we said when at that time we were live streaming to both YouTube and Facebook, every word was being not just recorded, but transcribed so that it could be, searched, and I've had some other experiences as well. So we want to encourage everyone to reflect openly and, share. And I think an important part of that is having time where things are not recorded. So that is our overall plan. And at any time, Scott and others, if you want to interrupt to give voice to questions that folks may have in the channel, I really think one of the best parts of this whole club is being able to connect with other, educators and professionals that are very interested in these topics and in media literacy. And so I hope that we'll do that. And in the coming year, I'd love to brainstorm with you all some ways that we can help make connections even beyond these webinars for folks who are using different kinds of platforms. So there is an interactive document. I think I still have this on my clipboard, so I'll paste that in. The two links there, the first one is to the slideshow. The second one is to this interactive document, which you are welcome to add notes to if you would like. It has a record of the past year, basically, of meetings that we have had. I want to encourage us to use some hashtags and then make connections on other platforms. And I'm wrestling with this in some other groups that I'm a part of. I'm now helping out with our local chapter of Indivisible, which helped organize the No Kings protests. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a bit. But, if we would constrain ourselves to, let's say, just Zoom chat, I mean, we can definitely interact and that's great, but we can also have other opportunities if we're using Blue Sky, Mastodon, Threads, or other kinds of channels. And so I just want to encourage you to try and use these hashtags, a hashtag for the Media Education Lab and the hashtag for our club. And this is something that I want to talk a little bit more about as we move forward. I want to let you know about some upcoming events. We've got the Exploring Media Quiteracy coming up on July 17th from the Media Education Lab. That's a free webinar. And then also on July 29th, a webinar entitled Our Time to Lead. And you can visit the website of the Media Education Lab and click on events to register for both of those. In addition, there is a Media Literacy Institute opportunity through the University of Washington. And so that is a paid opportunity, but there's a limit of 30 participants, but it's going to be that first week in August, August 4th through 8th. And so it's a 16-hour course, and I have had wonderful experiences personally with the Center for an Informed Public through the University of Washington a couple years ago. I actually was able to spend about 4 days with them for a workshop we did on media literacy lessons from Finland. And so I'm really excited to see this partnership with the Media Education Lab and this opportunity. And so I wanted to let you know about all of that. We are going to continue to gather as we are now the first Monday of each month. And so next month, that will be on August 4th. And as a topic, we're going to tackle searching with AI. As many of you know and probably have experienced now, a lot of folks are using AI engines, generative AI platforms over Google. And sometimes that's in combination, and Gemini is being integrated to Google search. But this is, an important phenomenon. We have all been using search engines for decades now, and Google has been primary, but there's implications when folks are searching with artificial intelligence engines. So we're going to tackle that, and there will be a registration link, as well as we've done before, some recommended media to, if you can, watch or listen before we meet, and then some optional media. So this was an image that I shared last month in June when we were talking about the Fediverse and Mastodon and Blue Sky and these social media platforms which are not algorithmically controlled like Facebook and Twitter X and some of these other platforms. And as we think about, and feel free if you want to drop a thought into the chat, what is significant about this image of, as some people will say, the tech bros who were on the stage at the inauguration in Washington, D.C. in January from a privacy standpoint? And I just, I've been thinking about privacy and surveillance and these topics for a long time. And it just, to me, seems like it's even more important for us to talk about this, because the level of control which platforms and platform owners have over speech is, I don't know. I don't know if it's unprecedented or not, but it's gigantic. And I don't use my Twitter, my X account very often, and I don't have a screenshot of this, but I opened up one of several Twitter accounts that I have just yesterday, and everything in my notification was a message posted by Elon Musk, because he owns the platform, and therefore he's able to customize the platform in that way to try to amplify his own voice in lieu of others. And so it is, these are very, very timely topics. So as we've done in the past, we have some, well, it's called required media, but it's just if you can in advance, give this a listen. And in this case, today, it was this about face recognition podcast that was republished by the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, on March 26th of 2024. And in addition, there were a couple tools that were spotlighted: Privacy Badger and Block Party. And so I'm actually going to visit the link because not everyone who's going to participate and hopefully benefit from this webinar is here live. And so these are links that we want to encourage folks to visit, and ideally it'd be great to find a way to have conversation, about these even after we're done. These are the optional media links, and the first one is to a documentary by PBS Frontline called The United States of Secrets. This is 11 years old now, and actually that part 2, June 2025, is not accurate. I needed to fix that, because anyway, this is 11 years old, but it is still so timely and so prescient. There is another EFF podcast called Digital Doppelgangers that talks about how advertisement technology builds shadow profiles of us and what we can do about that. A conversation with Edward Snowden, a very controversial figure in the world of technology and specifically surveillance and privacy, reflecting on global surveillance and civil liberties. A a podcast called Dr. Seuss Warned Us, talking about cultural storytelling and privacy themes. And then another podcast, but it's called Your Face to Their Database. And this is how facial recognition is biased and disproportionately affects communities and protesters specifically. So I'm going to link out to this page on the Media Education Lab. Just as kind of an overview, this is the home page, and you're going to see some things kind of scroll across as the banner plays there. And here's our free webinar series. You can click that link, or under programs, we're the link here called Media Ed Club. And when you click on past meetings, this is good to know, you can go to all of our recorded meetings that we've had for quite a while, and you can check those out. And here under upcoming meetings, this is where we are today, July 7th. And then these are the links to those different tools. With a show of hands, does anybody use Privacy Badger or another tool like it currently, either with Firefox, with Chrome? One of the things about privacy is that there's so much happening with respect to the web and web pages and apps. And a lot of times we're just not aware. I will tell you that I do not regularly use Privacy Badger. I have in the past, but it is something that um, is a recommended tool that certainly can raise awareness about privacy. The other tool here that's interesting is called Block Party, and this particular tool and others are affected by the policies that different platforms have for how their algorithms can be shaped and changed. But this is one that is mentioned in the second, or I guess it's the final podcast that was in our list. And this one, I think this is it. Is this the Ethan Zuckerman? No. It was in, I thought we had a link to Ethan Zuckerman. Anyway, it's another tool that was mentioned in one of these EFF podcasts, talking about how these tools can be managed and how we might be able to take more control. So I'm going to give a little bit of a reflection and overview, and then we'll open it up to some comments if folks want to chime in, and then we'll go to breakout rooms, which is probably where everyone will feel most comfortable sharing, since this is being recorded. How many of you have had an experience like this? I got a new flag to go outside our house from Costco. I had to borrow a special drill bit from my neighbor so that I could put holes in my brick in the front of our house. And literally, 30 minutes later or whatever, when I was done with this, I was inside and I opened Facebook. I saw an advertisement for concrete drill bit sets. All right. And I've had people all over the place tell me, oh gosh, well, I say, I've read things, I've watched podcast videos. Your phone's not listening to you, Facebook's not listening to you. I absolutely don't believe that because if I did not, have microphone access enabled, how in the world am I seeing an advertisement for, serrated concrete drill bits just, minutes after I've been using them and talking to my wife about it and having these kinds of conversations? That kind of experience, I believe, is something that a lot of people have had with their smartphone. And it's one of the things that we can certainly do, and I have done this at different times, is go into your smartphone, privacy settings, and look at the apps that have access to your microphone. And one of the realities today is that even if you don't have Facebook or Instagram or Threads, those are all Meta-owned properties, right? Even if you don't have those particular apps with microphone access, the way that the surveillance capitalism economy works today is that many, many apps will have data collection capabilities about us, and they will feed that information into an ecosystem that is largely hidden from us. But sometimes we will have these kinds of jarring experiences. So back in 2016, almost 10 years ago, I had a chance to share my second TEDx talk, and it is entitled Digital Citizenship in the Surveillance State. And this was actually a school TEDx event. and it was in Enid, Oklahoma, up north when we were living in Oklahoma City. And at that time, I was definitely aware of this encroaching and increasing power of surveillance and technology. In fact, I was the director of technology at our private school there in Oklahoma City. I did that for 4 years. And so I became very acutely aware of surveillance because I was responsible for the 100 plus cameras that we had on campus and work with different vendors, and there were just so many different things. But one of the puzzles that I had at that time was, what do I do about this? What do we do about this? We can see that the trajectory of technology it's done a lot of things, but one thing is it has given authorities greater ability to surveil and to collect data and then to act on that surveillance data. And so a lot of stuff was I raised a lot of issues in that TEDx talk, I think, but I was honestly doing that in large part because I was wondering myself, okay, this is happening, so what? What should we do about it? Well, to bring this into the current events here, here's July 5th, MSNBC. The headline is "Don't call it alligator camp," or don't call it alligator Alcatraz, call it a concentration camp. And today in the United States, we have a lot of really, really alarming things happening with respect to the exercise of executive power and authority. And when you consider the ways in which the surveillance state has been growing and where we are with what many observers would say is the behavior of a fascist regime, this is not just academically interesting or slightly troubling, but it could be considered existential, especially if you would be someone who would be targeted by law enforcement and you would be deported or you would be put into a concentration camp here in the United States or in El Salvador or elsewhere. And I was hearing this weekend about some of the reports coming out of El Salvador and some of the people that have been subjected to some horrific treatment. So a few weeks ago, I guess, what was it? Almost a month ago on June 14th, Flag Day, there were some protests around the country. The No Kings protest. I had an opportunity here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we live, to actually speak. We have about 8,000 folks that were there. I think that's the biggest group I ever talked to. And, it was very, I don't even know what the right word is. It was certainly a challenging environment to think about being because there were a number of people wearing masks there. Not most of the people weren't, but in some on college campuses and some places in our country now, wearing masks is illegal. We have reports about ICE agents who are wearing masks and black tactical gear, not having badges and things, arresting people in these different places, and then here I'm going to stand up and talk about anti-fascism and standing up for checks and balances in the country, and with my name, and it's going to be on social media, etc. So facial recognition is the main topic of the podcast that we, had as a suggested media to listen to. And certainly the issues of bias and inaccuracy is an issue. But there are more issues than just, oh, the facial recognition sometimes makes mistakes. That's a big deal. But the ways in which these databases are utilized and the ways in which they could potentially be utilized, especially when we think about what we suspect has happened with Doge and the ways in which data streams have been connected with the federal government and possibly data, accessed by outside commercial entities. Wow, it's really a pretty crazy and wild landscape with respect to all of this. So the interviewee of our recommended podcast, Your Face Belongs to Us, is her book. It's Kashmir Hill. You can go to her website, Kashmir Hill, and get more information. This is a screenshot of the TED Talk, which she gave back in 2018, which was entitled What Your Smart Devices Know and Share About You. I have not read this book, but I have definitely read a number of her articles throughout the past, let's say, 6+ years or more, I guess over the last decade. And I consider her voice and her journalistic inquiry to be exceptionally helpful and enlightening, and actually and also instructive when it comes to surveillance and where we are as a society. And then I am a current middle school media literacy and STEM teacher. I also ended up teaching a couple AP computer science classes last semester. And these topics are very important for us to be addressing with students, but it is difficult and challenging in some cases, I think, to help people understand why they matter so much. And I'm really wrestling with that in the lessons that I'm thinking about, using this next year. So one of the main stories that Kashmir talks about in her podcast and then also in her book is the story of Clearview AI. And she points out that Clearview AI, which has created a massive database, I think the podcast said every day ingesting 75 million new images per day. They have billions of images that they scraped or grabbed without permission from all kinds of websites, but they've created a searchable database that apparently a majority of law enforcement agencies in the United States currently pay for and license. And these tools are absolutely useful to law enforcement, but they also have a tremendous potential to be misused and to lead to some really, terrible outcomes for folks. And there are a lot of problems with this. One of the most interesting things I think in the podcast from the EFF that is recommended, and you can go back to and listen to if you haven't, is that it wasn't that Google and Facebook and Twitter were, quote, behind on the facial recognition. It's that ethically, in the case of Google specifically, they had decided not to basically create a Clearview AI database. And in addition to Clearview AI, Kashmir cites several other databases, some of which are open just for anybody in the public to use. I think some which don't require a login. Basically, you can take, an image and you can find all the places online where this person's image exists, and then the best guess of who this is. And there are folks that use the open versions, the consumer versions of this, to do helpful things like with dating sites to figure out if somebody really is, who they say they are, just to kind of check them out. But then there's also cases of people being stalked. If somebody meets someone, out at a bar or a club or somewhere, and their picture is taken, well, with that picture, now suddenly that person may not be anonymous anymore. And there's all kinds of things that can happen. I believe that studying and knowing about Clearview AI and what it is and how they really chose to broach an ethical boundary that Google and some other companies had decided not to, but they just sort of launched us further into this surveillance state environment, is a really important part of media literacy and specifically privacy and surveillance AI literacy. So I've come up with 4 questions that I would love for us to explore and talk about a little bit. I will share these in the chat as we go to breakout rooms here in just a little bit. I'm very curious as a current classroom teacher, what kinds of activities that we have found or we suspect can help students not just understand about these issues, privacy and surveillance, but also care about them. And that is challenging because there is a big sort of, shrugging, oh, well, it's just, they're just asking for my phone number when I'm buying stuff. I'm just, all of this, the web is free to a large extent. Social media is free to a large extent because of the data collection that happens. But it's just part of the puzzle. I'm interested in the rules which should limit how companies and organizations use our faces and images. And that is a loaded question, right? Some people believe we shouldn't have any rules. But if you've ever done any kind of reading about 4chan, 8chan, some of these Wild West parts and corners of the internet, um, there are dumpster fires that exist online, and if we don't have guardrails, we can end up having a dumpster fire and having a really toxic and horrible environment that can do a lot of damage to people, not just psychologically and virtually, which is real, but can result in physical harm to others as well. How should we, as educational leaders, as school leaders, respond to these issues of privacy and surveillance? I know there's a lot of schools out there with new cell phone policies. We have a new law here in North Carolina, I think, that just got passed and signed by our governor that everyone in every public school is going to have to student is going to have to turn off their phone every day. Um, but when it comes to owning your image and having the right to say things about your image, what kinds of things we've been dealing with this for a while, but are there good responses we should have? And then lastly, how can we balance the benefits of sharing with the risks of living in a surveillance society? I know I am a huge beneficiary of the generous sharing that many people have done throughout my professional career. I do avidly share myself, but I am aware that there is a trade-off. And so I think that's an important thing to consider, and that the answer to that question is different for different people. So these are the discussion questions. I'll go ahead and throw those into the chat as we go into our breakout rooms. It is about 12:27. What I want to do is go ahead and just turn off the screen share. Generally, we have more discussion after a breakout room. But I have just shared a whole bunch of stuff with you. And does anybody want to share a thought? And is there a question in your mind which you're wondering about? Because that's sometimes even better than like answer my question. What's your question that you're thinking about with respect to these issues? So you can just grab the microphone and raise your hand. And if it becomes a real uncomfortable wait time, we'll just go to breakout rooms. But would somebody be willing to throw out an idea there?
I,
Oh,
I
go ahead,
would.
Scott.
Um, One of the things that people say, and I think sometimes myself, is it's already too late. They've got all my data already, so there's nothing I can do. And then, how do we address that concern?
Absolutely. Yes. And I guess one way to answer that is, we've only just begun to live in the surveillance state, right? When I was a quick story, a tech director, we had over 100 cameras on our 80-acre campus, about 15 buildings. And that was a lot of video footage. And everything was on premises. It was on-prem, which means we didn't send it to the cloud. But one of the decisions, and we didn't do this, but that we could have made was if we wanted to send our video footage to the cloud, and we didn't have, this was 2015, this was like 2015 and the 2019 or something. Now you could probably have solutions that would be there, but basically you could start asking questions like, hey, was there a white Jeep that came onto our campus? Hey, was there this license plate? I mean, there's all these different things, and you could query the data. And so AI is now giving individuals and organizations, nation states, non-state actors, anybody, just incredible power to be able to filter through and utilize data, which in the past might have been so vast and just opaque that it couldn't be utilized. And so I think that's certainly a thought that occurs to a lot of us, but the pace of change with technology, I think it's continuing to accelerate. And I do think that AI is a game changer. I think we have to be wary and careful of those who are certainly going to benefit from a lot of fear that people have and wanting more investment and things like that in this great AI competition. But those are my thoughts. Anybody else want to respond to Scott or toss out another thought? I anticipate that we will feel a lot more comfortable sharing about this when we are not being recorded and when we are in our breakout room. So what I am going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and open up some breakout rooms. We've got about 12 of us here, and so I'm going to create 3 breakout rooms. And I'll go ahead and open those up. I'm going to pause the recording, and at about we'll just kind of see how it goes, but in probably about 15 minutes. So we'll do about 15 minutes of breakout rooms, and we'll come back and we'll invite folks to share. So if you want to um, sort of designate or appoint or just volunteer yourself to share your screen. Sometimes that's cool. You can bring some stuff up in your breakout room. I'll try to make sure sharing is turned on. But then also, if you want to ask somebody to share for you when we come back, you can do that. So breakout rooms are open. I will pause the recording and we'll see everybody back here in about 15 minutes. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good discussion in your area, in your breakout rooms. And I want to encourage you to do an active chat. Not everybody wants to grab the microphone. And if you say something in the chat, particularly given our topic, we won't call out your name. We'll just give voice to your um, message that you've shared. So, but if you want to raise your hand, if you just want to grab the microphone, we're a small group. So what did you all talk about in your group that you could come back and share with us? I'll give a little voice to actually this was somebody who was in our group. The principles of well, we don't need to go for a culture war with the invasion of individual rights. Human rights protection is also part of our media literacy work across fields everywhere. And that is an essential question, right? To what degree do we own our image and the right for our image to be used? And uh, do we need consent laws? There's a story in the podcast about I think it is. I don't know if it's Clearview AI, but it's a company, it's the company actually that owns Madison Square Garden and operates Madison Square Garden and then a bunch of theaters in New York. And so they use artificial intelligence in order to not only keep out, I guess, people who are identified as criminals, but also people that their lawyers don't like. And there's a story about that with Kashmir Hill. But that same company owns a theater or a venue in Chicago. And because the state of Illinois has a law that requires companies to get consent before using the image, that same technology can't be used to block people who are just, coming in the ticket gate. So we still have, I don't know if I don't even like to call it I'm not even going to give it the name, the bill that just passed Congress, the funding bill. There were some provisions at one point that were going to basically tell everybody that they couldn't restrict AI companies for 10 years or something like that. And so that's something to follow up on. I don't know if that actually made the final version, but it's, California has some different laws, different states have some different laws. Please grab the mic. Share a thought.
That bill wasn't that states could not create laws independent of the nation.
Right.
I think
Right.
that's
In other
The
words,
provision was removed, by the way.
well, it
it was.
was. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pam. Yeah, good. Well, I mean, yeah, because it is obviously difficult for companies to navigate just the different countries in the world and what different countries have as their laws. And then this was going to try to address the difficulty of having different state level laws. But that story from the podcast, I think, was a positive one, saying that, laws that did restrict the uses of images and required consent, we're making a difference in some places in the ways that AI was being utilized by companies. We talked in our group a little bit about this, students caring question. I had shared the link and it's in the chat for Have I Been Pwned? I have used that for years with students to help them become aware of data breaches and hacks and the information that's compromised, because you can put any email into that. And Troy Hunt, who is a security researcher for Microsoft, maintains that. And it is, you know, an eye opener a lot of times when you have, especially an email. I have my kids usually put a parent's email in there to see, how their passwords in many cases and other kinds of personal identifying information has been compromised. But that doesn't necessarily get to the idea of how do we help teens who are on social media care about privacy, or even just giving your phone number up, right? Going to the shopping center, and I do this too, right? I get discounts, I get fuel points, because I share my phone number, my shopper card, and all that kind of stuff. I think it's a real puzzle because we really don't have meaningful data privacy regulation federally here in the United States. And typically in a lot of webinars and things like that I've been in, there's a lot of hand wringing and there's a lot of acknowledgement that this is scary, this is an issue. But then it's like, okay, so what are we going to do now? And I am encouraged that some states have had success passing some data privacy protection laws. And this is up for debate. Maybe we don't need any, but I think that we need some limitations on what companies and corporations can do with our data. And it's kind of another level. There's the what do we teach kids, but then do we want to advocate ourselves uh, as citizens? Anybody want to chime in on that?
I mean, it's something I brought up in our room is that I feel, and I hate to, seem powerless, but it seems like we have so little influence over, what the companies do with data. And then even if there are, one thing I think about a lot is even if there are regulations, how would you know? How would you know that they're being enforced? There's no way to kind of peek under the hood and say, oh, look at that, you're violating the law. You have to go, have to trust the companies and say, hey, we're we're keeping your data secure. And
You're right, Scott. And that was pointed, I think, in the podcast too, that even when cease and desist letters were issued against Clearview AI, there was no evidence that anything changed. In those cases, there wasn't a lawsuit that was filed. Those are expensive. And so, yeah, what we can certainly feel we do have power in terms of what we choose to use ourselves, right? And I do think that we need to be trying to build a better internet. In fact, I'll try to share a slide before we're done about a couple other podcasts that are about this. Like, how can we do better with the architecture of the information environment that we're in and not just cede, you know, the architecture and the power to the billionaires. Jacqueline, you joined us again, or is it Jocelyn? It's Jocelyn. And one of your, Pamela said, Jocelyn, you had some good perspectives on China. Would you be willing to share any of those with us? And if not, that's
Sure, happy to. I'm afraid I was kicked off twice. I think I lost my internet connection, so I'm not going to turn on my video. I'll turn it on very briefly and hope I don't lose it again.
you're good. We can hear you very clearly, so no
Okay,
problem.
great. Yeah, so I live in China. I've lived there for the past 20 years. I'm now teaching in college high. Just turn it off now so I don't lose it, hopefully. Uh, And one thing that I tell my students, because they're very aware of the self-censorship that happens and issues that are they're not allowed to post online, such as anything about, sexual harassment, that sort of thing. So I try to help them develop a sense of what the risk level is. Now, China is a very different place, obviously, but the police, one student started a petition online to have a sexual harassment policy at our university publicized, which it is not publicized. The university doesn't want to do that. And the police contacted her and called her in. It wasn't as serious a situation. It was more like a slap on the wrist. But that sort of, I don't think we know yet in the US how this is going to play out. But I try to help them understand what the consequences are, at what stage they get serious, and understand their own tolerance for risk. I'm teaching university. Uh, Yeah, but I'm curious how other people, if I were in China and I dipped out twice, I've lost my internet connection twice, what would your interpretation of that be in this group?
Are you
Simply
saying
my
our
internet is, Mhm.
Go ahead, go ahead.
My internet, I just have a weak internet connection, which is probably true. Would that be your interpretation?
Oh, okay, whether we're being censored.
I wondered about that.
Okay.
If someone
Okay.
was listening in.
So this is what will happen, or is happening already, is
Right.
the fear, oh my gosh, did I cross the line? Did I say the wrong thing? And it was automatically, the conversation was cut off. And this does happen in China regularly.
Yeah.
I'm assuming yeah, I don't know what to assume in the US now, but I'm assuming that was not the reason.
No, I wouldn't think so. I think this is an encrypted Zoom call, but I've had an opportunity to travel to mainland China 4 times. Once was to Hong Kong, but and I'm not going to say that there are words that you can say about certain provinces in China where surveillance is extremely complete. It's just I don't know what it would be like to go through customs again in China. You know, there's a number of people wondering about travel outside the United States, coming back to the United States, customs. When I went to Egypt about 5 years ago, it wasn't a burner phone, but I had an Android phone and you know, don't believe I was engaged in anything at all that was illegal. But when it comes to privacy, do you want everything that's on your phone to be sucked off and then be in a database that a customs a nation's customs agency has, or that the security forces have? Because once it's digitized, you lose control and you have no ability to get that back. So that's actually a good thought. We have a number of kids who do travel, and so thinking about travel and what kinds of considerations you might think about with your phone, that could be a lesson, right? And stories that people have had. I don't know, it's challenging. I personally, from a media literacy standpoint, have tried to teach about, things like conspiracy theories and rabbit holes, and vetting sources, and tried to do it in a way that I didn't get fired throughout COVID and everything. Advertising and being able to address media literacy in terms of advertising is certainly an important way to address these kinds of issues. But I think we want to become more educated ourselves as citizens, but we're in a whole lot of different, we wear a lot of different hats, and many of the folks participating in the lab and the club, are adult educators and not doing middle school, technology literacy. So,
Wes, we can go back to privacy in general, that we really don't have it. I laugh in a way when I have to sign medical stuff about privacy, and I'm thinking this isn't real. And there was a comment in the chat, we've got to go to the youth, the very young, because by adolescence, they don't care about what adults have to offer. They're busy looking for the capital I. And whatever you say, it's like they don't think that they can be touched. And we, of course, come, and I'm probably one of the older people here, from a different generation, where there was more involvement with each other than I think there is now. But you could affirm that, because I don't work in education anymore.
Yeah.
So the AI and the Facebook and online, it's just one step further than the lack of privacy that we had before.
Well, you're right. I think we need to wrestle with these issues, and we need to start young, and we ideally need to have lessons and curriculum that are developmentally appropriate by age, but that like character education and other topics, it's never going to go out the door. We're always going to need to talk about ethics and respect and citizenship and those kinds of things. One thing, I don't know if you all saw the headline that Renee Hobbs was asked to speak to this. The state of North Carolina, the state that I live in, has recently, like in the last month, passed some legislation for media literacy education to start in another year. I know that Chicago and well, actually, the state of Illinois has done some of that. I think that hopelessness and helplessness, it's very important that we do everything we can to try to help each other feel empowered, and to think of constructive things that we can do. And that's why, in fact, I'm going to share this real quick, and we'll be almost at the top of the hour.
And I just popped a link in the chat to a Wired article called How to Protest Safely in the Age of Surveillance. Anybody might be interested in that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I will go ahead and add that link. Yes, this is great. I'll add that to our resources that we have for this session. I also wanted to pass along a couple different podcasts that I'm listening to and really recommend. Ethan Zuckerman has been a guest previously on EFF privacy related podcasts, but he is at the University of Amherst, and he has the podcast called Reimagining the Internet. Mike McHugh, who's one of the founders of Flipboard, one of my absolute favorite tools I've used for years on my iPad and my smartphone, has .social, and that's where I've learned a lot about the Fediverse. But it's this rethinking of not just social media, but the interactive web and the ways in which we are able to share ideas with each other. So those are both excellent podcasts. And I believe that sharing like that, a trusted voice, a great podcast, a book, all of those things can be hugely impactful for us. It's great to come to webinars, great to make connections, but when we can really sit with some ideas, I know it's old school, but a book, podcast, that it can have a big impact. And I think that's a big part of why we're doing this. We want to amplify good ideas, we want to connect with each other, and we want to empower each other to not only be better informed, but to have ideas and strategies about how we can teach and influence and support those that are around us, but also think about how we would act as citizens. And the idea of safely protesting is certainly an important and timely one for us. And then thinking about, like I said, travel, customs, entering the country, exiting the country, going through, customs. These privacy issues are tied to all of that. So if you
Wes, where are these resources? I mean, maybe this is the first time I've been to this group.
Yeah. No,
Where
I'm glad.
would those be?
You bet. I'm glad you asked. Okay, so let's see, make sure I'm clicking the right share button here. On the Media Education Lab website, when you go to programs and you find the club, for our upcoming and past meetings, the resources are listed below the registration. So we have the registration sign up, but then that's where the resources are. So that EFF podcast is here, and then these other documentaries and podcasts are here. EFF also does a great job, by the way, it's not on that one, of listing a lot of resources. So here's this podcast called From Your Face to Their Database. And below it, they've got a really excellent, list of resources as well. But if you go to the Media Education Lab's website and then find us for the club, we've got those resources listed. So thank you for asking that, Barbara, because others probably wonder that as well. So, all right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. Thanks for your participation. Please share the Media Education Lab. This is a fantastic community of educators, and we are, just one small piece of this, meeting on a monthly basis on the first Monday. But appreciate your attendance. Let's connect. And if you've got ideas for the coming year, for topics that you'd like to have us address, we are all ears. And so, again, our plan for next session is that we're going to try and talk about searching with AI. But the topics for the fall are not set, and I would love to get your suggestions. So thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording, and if anybody has any questions you want to offer or anything after the recording, feel free.
Thanks.